Let's cultivate our motivation. So the more our mindfulness increases, the more we realize that every action we do has a result. It may have a small result, it may have a big one, it may have a present result and a later result in future lives. But everything we do doesn't just evaporate into thin air. It creates a continuum of energy, karma, that will influence what we experience. And then one of the chief elements of the value of the karma we create is our motivation. If our motivation is virtuous or non-virtuous, spiteful or benevolent. So when we become very sensitive to our mind and to how things unfold in our lives, we really see how all of our actions matter in one way or another, and all of them create future experiences or influence what we experience. So what we do matters. And if we care about our own happiness, if we care about the happiness of others, then we will really monitor our mind and try and ensure as much as we can that our motivations are kind, benevolent, free of jealousy or resentment. So let's have a determination to do that, knowing that our actions are important. Our actions do have results, both for ourselves and for others. And thus to use our time wisely, to use our lives wisely, to create good causes and really enjoy our life in doing so. So one of the inmates that I correspond with asked a very interesting question in a recent letter. He had read how I talk about that we are responsible for our actions, but we're not responsible for other people's moods and emotions. Okay? And so he said, I got arrested and imprisoned because of drugs, and it was very hurtful to my family. They experienced a lot of pain. And he said, I didn't intend to harm them. I didn't have a bad motivation wishing them harm. But am I responsible for the pain that they suffered? Okay. Interesting question, isn't it? Because we usually think that to to be responsible for somebody's bad feelings or whatever, we have to have had an intention to harm them. Or we think that to create negative karma, we have to have anger or some kind of harmful intention to destroy somebody's happiness right then and there. But that's not it. That's one element. There's 3 poisonous attitudes, remember? There's ignorance, anger, and attachment. So he could see how having anger and hatred and belligerence, that would cause somebody's harm, and he really felt in some way that he was responsible for the pain that his family experienced. But he wasn't considering that attachment or ignorance also figured in the picture. Okay, so his attachment was to the drugs, and because of very strong attachment to the drugs, then he, with ignorance, completely ignored or was unaware of the effect of his actions on his family and on other people. Yeah. So he didn't really recognize that attachment as a harmful motivation. Yeah, so I have to point that out to him, that just because you don't have the intention to harm somebody doesn't mean that your motivation was okay. Yeah, because in his case, it's very clear that the strong attachment to drugs, which he said was to drown out his own pain, he's responsible for his actions of taking drugs and the surrounding himself by ignorance, mental ignorance, so that he didn't see the effect of his actions on other people or on himself. Yeah. And so, to keep this in mind, because we so often think, as long as I'm not angry, what I do is okay. And no, that's not it. Because strong attachment, can cause great negative karma. But the thing with attachment is we don't feel miserable when we have attachment, and especially when we get what we're attached to. So we think attachment's good, and we think attachment enlivens our life. And without attachment, our lives would really be terribly boring. That's what we think, because we think, I just saw everything. Yeah, I have it. I don't have it. It's okay. Then, there's nothing exciting in life. And that's not exactly it, because that kind of mind is the ignorant mind. Yeah, that, falls into complacency and so on, that also is not virtuous. Okay. And so learning to really look at our mental states and evaluate them and think of the results of them. Yeah, not just think about how does this mental state make me feel now, but what are the long-term results of this mental state? And what are the long-term results of what I say and do motivated by that mental state? So that we're always recognizing, like I was saying in the motivation, how our actions, they aren't just isolated events without any causes and without any results that just happen and then vanish. But, the result of causes, and then they produce a result, in turn. And to see them that way, and then that gives us more, that enables us to avoid creating the causes for the kind of future we don't want to have, and instead to create the causes for the kind of future we do want to have. And to really think of the small actions too, and how important they are. This morning, I was talking with Venerable Pende and Venerable Kunga, and we were looking at the book from the British Library about the Buddhist exhibition. And I was saying, because some of these things are many, many centuries old. And did the people who painted them or wrote them ever think that people many centuries from now would be reading them or looking at them and admiring them and being inspired in their own practice by seeing or reading the things? Yeah. Because so often when we do something, we're just thinking about the results for ourselves right now. Oh, I wrote this or I painted that, and, somebody's going to give me money or somebody's going to admire me, and that's the result and that's it, without really thinking, again, the long-term effect of our actions for many generations to come, when we may not be around at all, but other people will be affected by what we did here and now. And so, again, monitoring our actions, being mindful, not just because of the effect of the actions on ourselves karmically, but also the effect of the actions on untold number of beings in the future. Mm-hmm. So to just keep that in mind and to have a more expansive view of our actions. Yeah, that they came from somewhere. They came from factors that influence them. And they create many, many different results. Mm-hmm. So, like in terms of writing or painting, the motivation of those people who did those things in the exhibition, in the exhibit. The book is on the counter. You can look at it. Their motivations affect what they write, affect the artwork. Yeah. We just see the written words of the artwork, but you can get different feelings from what you're seeing, because what was in the person's mind influences what they created. And if they did it just, the king paid them and so they did this and that was it, or because they really had faith and they wanted to create things that would inspire other people. And so it's the same way with all the actions we do around here. Yeah, we could just go, okay, I got to go out in the forest and, cut these dead trees down and that's it, because somebody told me to. Or, I want to create a very beautiful place where, people from the city who are all wound up and tight and stressed out, where they can come and just see the natural beauty of this place and relax. Yeah, so you have two different motivations, and it really will influence, the energy of the place. Because I've done retreat at different times, and, when the staff cares about you and when the staff doesn't care about you. Yeah. We were on one of those retreats. Yeah. Remember your first Vajrasattva retreat? Yeah. So the way the staff was, and how they cared or didn't care, really, we could feel that, especially in terms of the food, that they were preparing for us while we did retreat. Yeah. So many of these things we just think, okay, you do it and it doesn't really matter your motivation. But, you put your energy into something and it does affect it. So to be aware and to really watch our motivation. In that retreat, it wasn't too difficult. It was kind of gross. There were I don't know, how many people were we on the retreat? 13 people on the retreat. So they would make 11 baked potatoes. Yeah. Yeah. So, what do you do then? Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So it was a good experience because it made me quite aware, if I'm affected this way by other people's motivations, then that's the same effect I have on other people by what my motivations are. Okay. So we're on page 240. So His Holiness has been talking about his own experience here, his own practice. In the last chapter, he was talking about the first Dalai Lama, and the value of cultivating bodhicitta, and how when the first Dalai Lama was on his deathbed, one of his disciples said, it was prophesied that you would go directly to a Pure Land. Will you do that? And he said, I have no wish to go there. Yeah, my wish is only to go to the troubled areas where I can serve. So we have the 14th Dalai Lama who is living that out. Yeah, if this world isn't a troubled place. Okay, so the next section is called Willingness to Undergo Hardship. So I think you probably want to skip that section. And we'll go on to the next one that says Keeping a Happy Mind. That one sounds better. Okay, but no, we're going to read this one, Willingness to Undergo Hardship. So His Holiness says, when we look at the life of our teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, we notice that he went through a process of spiritual development. He wasn't born a Buddha. Yeah, and he wasn't just lucky, but he went through a process of spiritual development. Born as a prince, he later gave up the comforts of royal life and became a monastic in order to pursue his spiritual practice. He endured the disapproval of his father, and his mother. They both freaked out. I don't think his wife was too happy. Yeah, he endured the poor living conditions that his wandering lifestyle entailed. He's a wandering mendicant, so he didn't have a fixed place to live. He slept outdoors. He had his alms bowl and never knew how much food, if any, he would get from one day to the next. He didn't have a wardrobe of clothes, all lined up in very beautiful drawers where he could go and, pull them out. Okay. He also did 6 years of severe ascetic spiritual practice. Okay. So much so that he ate only 1 grain of rice a day. And there's this statue in the Peshawar Museum of the Buddha when he was doing the ascetic practices. Lama Yeshe, this was one of his favorite statues, where the Buddha is completely emaciated, so much so that when he touched his belly button, he felt his spine. And he did these 6 years of ascetic practices with 5 friends. And then he realized that torturing the body didn't calm the attachment. And he gave up the ascetic practices. But then his friends got really upset with him and called him every name in the book because he flaked out and he was a softie and so on. Okay. So after all this, he displayed the act of attaining full awakening. Okay. So it was after leaving the house, the disapproval of his family, living as a wandering mendicant, ascetic practices, and so on. Then he attained awakening. It wasn't like he, left the palace, got in a Cadillac, went to, a very ritzy titsy temple with a spiritual master with all sorts of brocade and this kind of stuff, and then meditated for a week and came out as a Buddha. Okay, that's not what happened. So his life exemplifies the necessity to be able to bear hardship in spiritual pursuit. It's one of the lessons from observing his life. This is true of the lives of the teachers of many other spiritual traditions as well. The message we receive, and we see this in people who are really have a strong spiritual intention, is that spiritual intention is what motivates everything they do. And so their living conditions become less important. Yeah, they don't really care so much, if their comforter matches the rug. They don't care so much if their comforter is actually warm enough. Their mind is focused on their spiritual aspiration. Okay, not on being just the regular things regular people are who their minds are focused on. The message we receive from the example of their lives is that we, as the followers of these teachers, must be willing to go through hardship and persevere in order to realize our spiritual aspirations. Okay, so what it's saying is we have to, if we're going to really get anywhere, make our spiritual aspirations very strong so that they're really the center of our life. Yeah. So such that, other things don't disturb our practice because we're just focused on, taming the mind. Now, I don't know about you, but my mind often gets distracted by things around me, such that I forget the spiritual aspiration. Okay? So little things people do that I get annoyed with, or, the cook didn't make the food I like and instead made the food that, hurts my stomach. And, it's too warm in the room, it's too cold in the room, any number of things that the mind pays attention to. My little toe hurts, I didn't sleep very well last night, my shoes are too tight, I got stung by a wasp, one thing or another, always. Said bodhicitta in the morning, and then the smallest tiny things, the mind can't endure and proceeds to complain. The complaints often start out with, this should. So all of our shoulds, the way things should be, and it's complemented by, it's not fair. And that is complemented by, poor me. And so, we kind of bounce around between this should, it's not fair, poor me. But I want to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all these suffering sentient beings. But I can't stand to be with these suffering sentient beings because they complain and they get mad and they're so petty. So petty. They make such a big deal about nothing. I want to go somewhere where I can just meditate in peace. Yeah, get away from all these horrible sentient beings. In the summer, it's the wasps. Now we have the stink bugs and the spiders coming inside in the autumn. Don't they know they're supposed to stay outside instead of come in? Yeah. Yeah, you have stink bugs and spiders? Huge. Oh, huge, huge.
Of such a body.
Yeah, that's a baby spider.
I can show you. You would be scared.
Yeah.
I can show you.
No.
Yes, of the picture.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll take you to India sometime, and then you can see what real spiders look at. This is nothing. Yeah. See, these troublesome sentient beings, you make a statement and then they contradict you. Yeah? Yeah? Oh, you don't know what a good big spider is. I know what a big spider is. Yeah. Okay, you know what a big spider is. You're right. And I'm wrong. Are you happy now?
No, I just say you don't want to have the spider in your bed either. Even if it's small.
So sometimes the thought remains in the back of our minds. Yes, the Buddha went through so many hardships to attain awakening, but I don't need to do this. Yeah, because after all, he did these ascetic practices and then he stopped because he saw that they weren't taming the mind. Yeah, so, if you don't do ascetic practices, then that means you must live a comfortable life. There's no ground in between severe asceticism and pampering yourself. So he said severe asceticism didn't work. So, okay, I'll pamper myself. I don't need to do what the Buddha did. Somehow, I'll be able to attain awakening without having to give up the comforts and luxury that I'm attached to. Is that thought lurking in the back of your mind? Yeah. Although we may not say it, thinking in this way indicates we believe that we are more fortunate than the Buddha. Yeah, the Buddha had to go through such suffering. I'm special. I don't need to go through hardship. Yeah. Well, the Buddha had to go through so many hardships, we feel we can attain the same spiritual realizations without having to live ascetically and endure difficulties as he did. This is mistaken. The Buddha taught the middle way, a path avoiding the extremes of severe asceticism and heedless indulgence. Okay, so there is a middle ground in there. Yeah. Nonetheless, we must be willing to give up the pleasures to which we are attached if we are to penetrate the nature of reality and open our hearts with bodhicitta towards all beings. Okay, so he says we must be willing to give up these things. It doesn't mean that tonight we go and we throw everything out and, put ourselves in a state of extreme asceticism such that in a week we are totally fed up and we run down the hill and go to Starbucks. Okay? So that's not what His Holiness is advocating. Our priorities must be clear. Which do we value more, our present comfort and security or spiritual liberation? That's the question. What do we value more, our present comfort and security or spiritual liberation? So when he's talking about comfort and security, it doesn't mean only physical comfort. It includes that, but it also includes, the mind that wants to be loved and appreciated and receive praise and approval. All of that fits into the meaning of comfort and security. So do we want that, or do we want spiritual liberation? Are we willing to undergo the physical and emotional hardships of relinquishing our attachments in order to practice the spiritual path? These are questions on which we must reflect deeply. Each of us will face different hardships along the path. For some people, the challenge will not be living a simple lifestyle, but enduring the criticism of family and society. Others will face having to practice despite health issues, while some must deal with strong sexual cravings. Okay, so we all have our own variety of attachment that will plague us and interfere. We must develop the internal fortitude to persevere in our practice, no matter what suffering, physical, emotional, or mental, comes our way. So developing that inner fortitude is what Dharma practice is. Okay? That's one big element of Dharma practice, is developing that inner strength, inner courage, that you don't get overwhelmed or overpowered by small things. You know? And what you consider a small thing will change. Yeah. Right now, many of us are overpowered by really the tiniest things. Yeah. But when we develop strength, then something else can happen that we previously would have considered a big thing, but now because we have more inner strength, it becomes a small thing. Okay. So what you consider big or small is going to change. So I remember one time at our Western teachers' monastic gathering, we were telling stories, and there was this one older Theravada monk. He had been ordained for quite a while. And he was telling the story of living in Thailand, and he loved mangoes, Thai mangoes, and how difficult it was, because, they only ate, they say they eat one meal a day, but they actually have two, because they have breakfast and then lunch. But that was the only chance to have a mango. And, sometimes he would get the mangoes and sometimes he wouldn't. And how he would eat lunch, and his mind would just be craving the mango, and, would somebody come along and give it to him, or because he couldn't reach out and take it. All the suffering of dealing with his mind about over-attachment to mangoes. And, and so he was talking about how he had to work with developing non-attachment and so on and so forth, so that his mind didn't go crazy every month. And I was sitting there listening to that going, wow, if that were the thing that was my challenge, I would be very grateful. And then I started talking about my time in Italy, and yeah, where I got put through the ringer, where, and so my things, I had enough food there. I mean, I wasn't lacking spaghetti and, and pizza and delicious Italian food. But, I was lacking appreciation and approval and kindness and a feeling of belonging. And, instead I was made fun of and, so on and so forth. Okay. So what His Holiness was saying here about each of us has our own challenge, and things that we have to work through. That's very much the case. Yeah. And, and at different times of our life, one thing will be challenging and another thing won't. And then a few years later, the thing that wasn't challenging that will become really challenging, and what was kind of gets put on in the back burner. Yeah. So we kind of have to be prepared for it all. And the way we are prepared is by keeping our spiritual intention quite focused, And this question that His Holiness poses, what is more important, our comfort now, our present comfort, or our spiritual aspirations? Yeah. Because if we don't keep that question really in front of us, then we get derailed so easily. Yeah. One phone call from a relative can make us fall apart. Yeah. One bill, received in the mail can make us dissolve. So that's why we have to really, build the clarity of our intention and setting our priorities. Okay, now we're at the section, keeping a happy mind. Now, before we start this section, I want to say, when I was studying at Dorji Pomo and Nalanda with Khenzo Rinpoche, Geshe Jampa Tekcho, and people would go and ask him advice, and his advice often was keep a happy mind. And that advice really puzzled me, because if I had a happy mind, I wouldn't be going to ask him for advice. And telling me to keep a happy mind didn't tell me how to keep a happy mind, because if I knew how to keep a happy mind, I wouldn't be asking for advice. Yeah. So it was a little bit like a koan for me. Yeah. What does keep a happy mind mean? And how in the world do you do it? Okay. So His Holiness says, it is important to keep a happy mind when practicing Dharma. Buoyancy, enthusiasm, and joy are needed to maintain our practice. These cannot exist in a mind weighed down by depression. Okay? So, let's continue. People ask me how I maintain a happy mind and a relaxed demeanor, even though I have been a refugee for over 50 years. Now stop for a minute. What kind of mindset do you think you would have if, in your late teens, early 20s, where you lived was invaded and you had to flee over mountains and go live in another country with a totally different climate, totally different food, where you didn't speak the language, you didn't know the culture, plus you were the leader of a whole group of people who were looking to you for guidance on what to do now that they had become displaced persons and refugees. Now think about that for a minute. Yeah. Yeah, you're in your late teens, early 20s, and this is what's happening in your life. Now, would you have the ability to handle it? Yeah. And as time went on and the situation continued and you couldn't go back to your homeland and you saw where you grew up being destroyed and the people who remained behind being imprisoned and tortured and and so on. Yeah. Well, what kind of feeling would you have? How would you look at life? And especially all these people who are looking to you for guidance. Yeah. So, this is His Holiness's experience. This is what happened to him. And one thing that I didn't add is he became the official leader of these people when he was quite young. So you became president, or even you don't want to be president, governor of your state when you're, 15, 16, 17, something like that. Yeah? Can you handle it? Can you imagine that? So, this is His Holiness's experience. So we usually think, oh, it's the Dalai Lama. He gets such good food. Everybody looks at him like this with smiles and eagerness. And, they love him so much. His life must be wonderful. No, think about what it's like. And think about what his life is like to guide people who come in, ask for advice. He gives advice. They say yes, and then they go out and do something else. How do you handle that? When somebody asks you for advice, you give it, and then they go do something else. Yeah? And this is what happens to our teachers all the time, and especially His Holiness. People being quite two-faced sometimes. Mm-hmm. So one time, and I saw this on TV when this event happened, one time a news reporter was interviewing me and asked me why I wasn't angry, given the fact that I have witnessed so much destruction in my native land and to my people. I looked at her and replied, what good would it do to be angry? I wouldn't be able to sleep well or be able to digest my food. Plus, my anger wouldn't change the situation at all. I suppose she assumed I would take the opportunity to tell the world about the sufferings of the Tibetans under communist Chinese, and was astonished when I didn't. Because the reporter, asked His Holiness this. And of course, this was in the days with Yasser Arafat, and the Palestinians had lost their land at about the same time as the Tibetans had lost theirs. And, you were having all the things going on with the Palestinians and the hijackings and so on. And then the reporter asked His Holiness that, and she was just looking like she was so shocked. Yeah, because she was giving him the opportunity to rail against communist China and this and that and the other thing. And he didn't. And he wasn't angry. And he said, anger's no use. Yeah. It was very interesting to watch. Well, while we may sometimes experience happiness when the mind is non-virtuous, for example, the pleasure that arises when our craving is satisfied. Yeah. So we don't think of that as the happiness that arises when the mind is non-virtuous. When the pleasure that arises when our craving is satisfied, we say, oh, there's nothing, non-virtuous about my craving being satisfied and my self-centered mind getting what it wants. Yeah, we don't even see that as, having any defects. Okay. For example, the pleasure that arises when our craving is satisfied, or when we have exacted revenge on someone who hurt us. Yeah. Oh, good. I got him back. I feel so proud of myself. I showed him who's who. Yeah. How we gloat like that after we harm somebody. That happiness that we experience in those two situations does not help us on the path to awakening and should be abandoned. In any case, deep down, I don't think we are really happy then. Yeah, especially when we get our revenge. Are we really happy deep down? when we crave something, we finally got it, and our self-centeredness is, are we really happy deep down? Okay. So other experiences of happiness are rooted in virtuous mental states. When I am generous and can relieve the poverty of others, I feel good inside. The ability to live ethically with a nonviolent attitude makes me rejoice and generates a sense of well-being. When you wake up in the morning and you're in a bad mood and you're mad at people, yeah, do you feel happy? When you wake up in the morning and you have a generous mind and you're enthusiastic about doing something for others, do you feel happy? Yeah. It's like we just need to look at our own experience. Having loving kindness towards others brings pleasure in the mind, and doing my daily meditation practice, which deepens my refuge in the three jewels, brings great inner satisfaction. It is also said that gaining meditative stabilization suffuses the mind with bliss. We are often distracted from the Dharma by sensory stimuli, attractive or repulsive sights, sounds, smell, taste, or physical sensations. I would go as far to say as we're riveted by those things. The smallest beautiful thing, we gotta look, or the smallest uncomfortable thing, and we're agitated. And our Dharma's out the window then, yeah. But when our mind of attachment doesn't have enough sense stimuli, we are bored. Yeah. Life is boring. We crave sense stimuli. People who are very involved with the external world of the five senses often find themselves in this predicament of boredom and are frequently dissatisfied, whereas those who derive happiness from internal qualities, faith, love, compassion, wisdom, and so forth, experience much joy and contentment. Yeah, so it isn't what you're surrounded with, it's the qualities you cultivate inside. They are not swept away by the goings-on of people and the environment around them. So you work in the White House and you're just, in a good mood, laughing the whole day. Okay. Too much sensory input makes us exhausted and our mental potential declines. Yeah. And I think that's what happens a lot nowadays, is there's too much sensory input. Yeah. People are glued to their devices, craving more, some sensory input and anything that is new. It doesn't even have to be interesting. It just has to be something new to look at. Yeah. And then I think that's one of the causes of just being exhausted at the end of the day. Yeah. Because everything, coming at you. And you don't filter anything, and you don't set limits and say, no, I'm not interested in that. I don't want that kind of thing to affect my mind. Okay. Too much sensory input makes us exhausted and our mental potential declines. For that reason, it is better to watch our mind. I don't watch television or explore the internet, although I do listen to BBC News on the radio, so I know what is going on in the lives of other sentient beings. Listening to the news becomes a kind of meditation on karma and its effects, and inspires me to cultivate compassion. And that's really true. if you look at the news that way. In my own practice, I weed out the unwholesome states that bring some sort of temporary polluted pleasure, and instead put energy into cultivating wholesome mental states. That enables me to keep a happy mind, which is important to continue practicing the Dharma, even in difficult situations. Okay, so I'm going to read this again, because here he's telling us the answer to the puzzle that I was saying with Khenzo Rinpoche. How in the world do I have a happy mind? Yeah. So he says, I weed out the unwholesome states that bring some sort of temporary polluted pleasure. So don't get involved with those things, and instead put energy into cultivating wholesome mental states. So he's saying, I direct my mind towards, thinking about the qualities of the three jewels and generating faith, thinking about the kindness of sentient beings and generating love, thinking about the suffering of sentient beings, and having compassion, thinking about the nature of reality, generating wisdom. So he's saying that he's really, directs his mind to think about the things that create a sense of joy and peace and inner satisfaction. Yeah. So wouldn't it be nice when your inner satisfaction is more than knowing that you got everything on your list for the day done? Yeah. You know how we feel satisfied? Oh, look, I got all the things on my list done. Oh, I feel so satisfied. And that's the height of our satisfaction, that's really limited, isn't it? Okay, next section is called Realized Beings. So some people have asked me whether I know people who have attained full awakening. In fact, people go up to His Holiness and say, are you a Buddha? I hear that you're Chenrezi. Are you really the Buddha of compassion? Yeah. Can you cure my illness? Yeah. Please, give me a pill, blow on my mala, do something. Okay. The Buddha stipulated that unless there is great purpose in revealing one's realizations, one should not do so. Speaking of one's own spiritual attainments is an infraction of the monastic precepts, and proclaiming realizations that one does not have is a root downfall, such that one is no longer a monastic. So this is very clear. One of our root downfalls is claiming to have some kind of spiritual realization or special power that we don't have. Yeah? If you do that, your ordination's finished, gone. You can't retake it. Even if what you say, so that's in cases of making it up when you don't have that. Even cases where someone may have that realization, revealing it is also a lapse. It's a transgression. Falsely proclaiming one has realized emptiness is a root downfall of the Bodhisattva ethical code. Thus, proclaiming one's realization publicly is unheard of among true Buddhist practitioners. That's why I always tell people when somebody tells you that they've realized something, hold on to your wallet. Yeah, because if you're a real practitioner, you never, ever, ever do that.
What kind of realizations are we speaking about?
Okay. Saying I've attained the jhanas. Yeah, the dhyanas. I've realized emptiness. I'm a bodhisattva. The nagas and spirits come and request teachings from me and pay homage to me. I have clairvoyant powers and I can read other people's minds. I know what's going to happen in the future. Um, I can cure diseases by, making abracadabra. Just claiming that one has any kind of uh, supernormal power. Um, yeah, like that. Okay. So it's so deceptive because you create a false image in somebody else's mind. And the root story in the monastic precepts shows why. There was a group of monks that was during Varsa, the rains retreat, and they were doing Varsa in a place where there was a famine, so the people couldn't give them very much food. So they were hungry. So they started going around proclaiming that they had different realizations. And then the populace, out of respect, and admiration, started giving them food that they would normally, the little food that they did have in the famine, instead of keeping it for their family, they would give it to these practitioners who they thought were highly realized. And when the Buddha found out about this, what happened is after Varsa ended, these monks went to see the Buddha. And, everybody from the area was very thin, but these monks were very well nourished and round and, good complexion and so on. And the Buddha said, well, what did you do? And then they told him what they did. And, and he said, this is totally despicable because you're deceiving the lay people. Yeah, you're lying in order to get food. And here the lay people are sacrificing what they need to eat, thinking that you have realizations that you don't have. And so it's so deceptive and harmful. Yeah. And so he said, if anybody in the future does that, then they're out of the Sangha. Yeah. So it's interesting because sometimes with these stories, like you would think, well, but this was an extreme situation. So they would have been very hungry. They would have gotten sick. So it was okay for them to lie and create this false appearance because it enabled them to remain healthy during the Varsa and not fall ill. Because if you get sick, then, you can't practice the Dharma. So, what they did was okay. It was an extreme situation. Somebody could think that very easily. Yeah? And then they could think, oh, the precept against lying is, some really severe, obvious lie. Yeah, that had nothing to do with that kind of situation. But no, it was, the origin story is about a situation where we could even have some understanding of why they did it. But the Buddha said, no, absolutely not. That's a horrible motivation and very bad effects on Buddhism in the world.
I've always been somewhat puzzled that in our precepts, the people who have realizations, who tell the laity and the public about them, is a much less serious offense. I've always been a little bit puzzled about if you do have the realizations, it's considered to be a lapse rather than a parajika.
Oh, okay.
I would think that someone who had realizations would, out of humility and wisdom, not. Right. I've always been puzzled by that.
Yeah, well, that's why it's a lapse, because you would think out of wisdom and humility to not destroy their own practice. They would keep those things quiet. But at least they're saying something that's true, whereas in the other situation, they're lying in order to get food, that in an area of famine where the people can't afford to give it, So it's a much deeper deception. what?
Once you have realization.
Yeah, they tell it out of pride. But then what happens is when you talk about these things a lot, then they just become words and stories. And the whole feeling from it goes away. So, of course you can talk about it with your teacher. Or if you're in retreat and there's other monastics, or other meditators around and you need some advice, you can talk about it, but not publicly mentioning these kinds of things. Yeah, there was one teacher who, was teaching Lam Rim, and every time he would get to the part on emptiness, the way he taught it, and, everybody would leave saying, oh, he's realized emptiness. Yeah. And so he didn't say it in so many words, but, the whole demeanor and the look in his face and whatever it was, his disciples would all go, oh, he's realized emptiness. He's a bodhisattva. And I won't tell you what happened to him. You might have read it in the newspaper. Okay, so then His Holiness says, nevertheless, I have had the opportunity to meet some people who have experienced extraordinary development and may be near Buddhahood. Meeting those people demonstrates that the teachings are alive and gives us great inspiration and determination. For this reason, refuge in the Sangha, the highly realized beings, strengthens our practice. So he's talking about the Sangha jewel there. In the remainder of this section, and then this is my voice here, would like to explain further why realized beings do not discuss their attainments, especially nowadays when people make great effort to proclaim their good qualities and accomplishments. Because many people come up to me. I mean, people that are generally, they have their head, screwed on properly. And they say, why don't our teachers, if our teachers have these abilities, why don't they show them to us? It would really inspire our faith. What's the problem? So what I want to say here is kind of an answer to that. First, speaking about attainments has a deleterious effect on our own practice. As soon as someone begins to talk about spiritual experiences publicly, words begin to replace experience. It becomes a story that you tell over and over and over again. Yeah, the actual feeling of the experience fades in the mind, and we become expert in telling a fascinating story. And, so that everybody in the chai shop or everybody at the party or everybody at the Dharma teaching is listening with rapt attention as we, reveal our spiritual experience and the great, extraordinary things that happened. Okay. It is easy to become arrogant, and complacent if we attain celebrity as a spiritual luminary. Isn't it? Then everywhere you go, I saw this with this one person I was talking about. Everywhere he went, oh, there he is, And it's like, I had met him once and I was like, there was nothing. I didn't feel anything special. But, I feel, oh, look, and there he is. Okay, so it's easy to become arrogant, to become complacent. So for the sake of our personal practice, remaining humble and modest is best. Furthermore, spiritually immature people easily confuse an unusual meditation experience for spiritual realization. So if you've read the book After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, you can see how this happens. Even if their intentions are good, if they proclaim their spiritual prowess and begin to instruct others, naive people can easily be led astray and follow an incorrect path. And this is unfortunately very prominent. People with a lot of charisma start talking about something, and then, like, I get phone calls from these people, 5 years later or 10 years later saying, this person said they ordained me. Did I really get an ordination? This person taught me this practice. Is this really a Buddhist practice? It's so sad when you see this kind of thing. Okay, then if that teacher's veneer cracks, the followers will be deeply disillusioned and may even abandon following a spiritual path altogether. And that's what's really sad, because they had so much faith, and then their teacher kind of let them down. But we have to, let me read the next sentence and then I'll come back and talk about it. Teachers who make no special claim to greatness avoid being transformed into false idols by their followers. Okay, so the thing is, that it's a two-way thing. On one hand, the teacher, acts big and mighty and powerful. On the other hand, the students idolize the teacher. So it's like the students give up their wisdom, and, I was just reading the article you sent by Daya Rinpoche. That, he said it very clearly. People are looking for a substitute father or a substitute friend or a substitute mother or whatever it is, and they impute all this goodness and realizations on this person without having much discrimination, discerning wisdom about what's going on. And so develop this thing of, and what's really tricky is this is what people are taught to do in Tibetan Buddhism. The guru is the Buddha. You see the guru as the Buddha. And this is actually only in Tantra that you do that. But it's taught to people who first walk in a Dharma center who don't even know Sutrayana, and they're taught, see, the guru as the Buddha. And then if you don't do that, and instead you see fault, then, there's a whole description of the hell realms that you get born in and how long you stay in those hell realms. Yeah. And so people who just come in, they're looking for relief from their pain. And this is one of the first things they hear in the first few months of their teaching. And, they don't know the qualities to look for in a teacher because those weren't taught. So they just know, oh, this person is a teacher, and you see the teacher as the Buddha. So, without understanding that it's their responsibility to check out the qualities of someone before taking that person as their teacher, they just automatically assume somebody has that title, they've been screened, they're competent, they are my teacher, and they must be the Buddha. And then they're held in that position by fear. And, this is the problem, I think, of tantric topics being taught way, way, way too early for people. So it was very nice to read Daya Rinpoche's article where he's basically saying the same thing, and to hear Rinpoche actually say that, that in the context of the West, this is just not, it's not at all productive for people. Yeah. And it's much more productive just, to have something normal without so much fantasy, And he made a very good point in the article. He said, some teachers will criticize their students for the student's lack of pure vision of their teacher. You're supposed to see the teacher as the Buddha. You guys have impure vision, and that's why you're not seeing the great things that I'm doing and my wonderful intention and blah, 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 blah. And Rinpoche says in the article, why is the teacher saying that? Because you can only tell if somebody's a Buddha if you yourself are a Buddha. If you aren't a Buddha, there's no way you can tell that somebody's a Buddha or not a Buddha and have that pure vision. Yeah. And yet here are these people who come along who are expected and told to have that vision when, they can't. They're not Buddhas themselves. Yeah. So it's so refreshing to hear Rinpoche say that. Yeah. Did everybody get it? Yeah. So it's very nice. Yeah. And it's true. And I think if people had their feet on the ground more, a lot of these problems wouldn't happen. Yeah. But it's tricky because, the people need to use their wisdom, but then in the teachings, they're taught this other stuff. Yeah. And they're not taught that, it's just for Tantra and so on. Yes. Are you having impure view? You don't see the kindness of this community, that they are all Buddhas and love you tremendously? Huh? Yeah. Okay. Say someone with actual attainments were to announce them publicly, like many Dharma students say, why don't these people have the abilities? Why don't they show them? Okay. So let's say somebody did. What would come of it? Many people would worship that person instead of listening to their teachings. Yeah. If you saw somebody doing all sorts of magical things, kind of walking on water or projecting the future or these kinds of things. I mean, we're so it's like they're up with the sports stars and the movie stars, and we would idolize them. Yeah. Okay. So imagine if the Buddha appeared in New York with a body of radiant golden light. Yeah. In the middle of Times Square. There's the Buddha, radiating light. Okay. People would be so struck by amazement that they would stare at him and wait for him to perform miraculous feats. Yeah. If he taught about love and compassion, it would go in one ear and out the other, because they would be so like, look, he has a golden body and he's radiating light and I'm soaking up that light. Oh. Okay, so that's what, couldn't you imagine it in the middle of Times Square? Okay, so people would stare at him and wait for him to perform miraculous feats. The media would want to interview him, and soon there would be a new line of apparel named after him. Yeah, the radiant jeweled light. Yeah, the Buddha body clothesline. Yeah, clothing line. Yeah, made by Ivanka Trump in China. If someone has genuine and stable realizations, people with merit who are receptive will discern this and have faith in that person. It is not necessary to advertise one's qualities. Someone who is a good cook does not need to proclaim his culinary feats to all. When he cooks a meal, people will know for themselves. That last bit came from Senchab Serkam Rinpoche. He said that to me one time. Humble behavior is a sign of spiritual attainments. People with genuine realizations have no need for praise, reputation, and the glamour and perks that they bring. Their main interest is in stabilizing and enhancing their realizations and in benefiting others. In special cases, a teacher with close connections to a few students may reveal his or her spiritual experiences in a confidential manner in a private setting. This may be to inspire those students who are already dedicated to the path so that they will put more energy into their practice. These students should be discreet with regards to what they have heard. So if the teacher says something in a private situation, you don't go out of the room afterwards and say, oh, our teacher told me he realized emptiness. Isn't that great? No, you don't talk like that. You're very discreet. While publicly discussing our attainments does not serve a good purpose, consulting with our spiritual mentor when engaging in intense spiritual practice is important. During a meeting, we relate our spiritual insights and experiences to the spiritual mentor, who will help us evaluate and understand them, and will give us further guidance and instructions. If a practitioner is in strict retreat and her spiritual master is not nearby, she may discuss her meditation experiences with a trusted and experienced fellow retreatant to clarify and refine her understanding and avoid misinterpreting an experience. As such, it is important for spiritual progress. Okay, so in certain situations, it's okay to talk about this. Okay, then what I have learned in life. So this was a question I asked him, what have you learned in your life? So someone once asked me, you have lived many decades now. Please sum up the most important things you have learned in life. I paused to reflect. Of course, I have had many different kinds of experiences, as a citizen in my own country and as a refugee, as a young person and now as an older one, as a student and as a leader. In Buddhism, we always pray for the welfare of all sentient beings, no matter their life form. This has had great impact on me. In all situations and with a wide variety of people, I regard everyone as being fundamentally the same. Each of us wishes to be happy and to be free from suffering. Thinking like this, I immediately feel close to others wherever I go. There is no barrier between us. That was what I was trying to say during our diversity training. As a result of meeting many different kinds of people, and also due to the experience that age brings, I act in an informal manner with everyone and talk to others as one human being to another. This attitude and behavior eliminate any ground for anxiety. On the other hand, if I thought, I am the Dalai Lama and a Buddhist monk, so I should act in a certain way and people should treat me in a particular way, that would foster anxiety and resentment. So I forget about such distinctions and see that I am just a human being who is meeting another human being. On the emotional level, we are the same. On the mental and physical levels, we are also the same. It is helpful for me to think in this way, and it also puts others at ease. Sometimes at the beginning of a meeting or a conversation, people are very reserved and stiff, but within a few minutes, that is gone and we feel very close. Yeah. So it depends on our own mind. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter. Do you have questions or comments?
I just wanted to make a comment that the section on keeping a happy mind and the section on a willingness to undergo hardship, that fortitude and that attitude of cultivating a happy mind through having virtuous qualities, how they are so interconnected and mutually supportive. It's because we tend to see hardships as one thing, and
And a happy mind is another.
But they're a lot less hard if we are able to keep a happy mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. First, we get rid of my hardships. Then I'll be happy. Rather than Dharma practice is dealing with my hardships. And by practicing the Dharma, I become happy.
The saying about the meal, Shenshap Rinpoche, who's that? Who's?
Oh, Senshap Circum Rinpoche.
Circum Rinpoche.
Yeah. Okay. So, so next week we'll start with working in the world. And, these are many different, whereas Holiness just talks about how to integrate Dharma with different things in the world, different fields of interest, different activities. So very helpful. Yeah. When I was initially planning the book, I was going to put this chapter at the very end, kind of like, you do emptiness and Tantra, and then you come back and work in the world. But then I thought about it, and it's like, people are always asking His Holiness these kinds of questions. And so it's very pertinent for people who are beginning the path too. So better to put it earlier in the series rather than, after emptiness and Tantra. Yeah, because we live in the world, and part of, how do we create virtuous karma? By offering service to sentient beings and in our daily life doing things, whether you're ordained or whether you're not, because most people don't have the mental capacity or the karma to go into years-long retreat, especially at the beginning of their practice. You have to really exert time to doing purification and creation of merit. And so learning how to integrate the Dharma in your daily life is quite important.
I want to know, can you point us to the article?
Yeah, Venerable Jampa, how do they get the article? It's on the web? It's on the web. What would they Google to find it? What's the name of the article?
It's on info-buddhism.com.
Info-Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean minus?
What do you say?
MINUS?
Info
dash
Buddhism.com. Taking responsibility and seeing eye to eye with the Guru.
Yeah. And his name is Dagyab Rinpoche, which is spelled DAGYAB.
DAGYAB Rinpoche, and Norden Dagyab, NORDEN, his wife.